Prior to venturing out from home, Jack composes a letter to make sense of his arrangement. His sister Lily has been deranged since their mom kicked the bucket and attempted to self-erase, however Jack saved her in the nick of time. Jack maintained that her should be delivered to home consideration under the family specialist, but she turned into a dependent of the government and has been shipped off a haven, where no guests are permitted. Frantic to help her, Jack chooses to claim to be insane, so he's shipped off the haven as well, abandoning the letter as insurance contract. He begins by getting a few injuries, trimming his hair gravely, and breaking the mirror. Then, at that point, he goes out shirtless openly and begins finding individuals while reviling and rambling about beasts. Before long the police show up and hold him down while the paramedics give him a narcotic. Minutes after the fact, Jack is taken to the shelter and a gatekeeper named Charles diverts him on a cot to see Dr. Janetti. Jack feels lightheaded due to the narcotic yet figures out how to say more rubbish to keep up his demonstration. Janetti promptly concludes Jack needs to remain in greatest security and Charles takes him to an extraordinary hallway where lots of hazardous individuals are kept in cells. Charles attaches Jack to his bed while making sense of one of his neighbors as the notorious Imprint, who killed a lot of young ladies and kept their bodies to do the messy. On out, Charles sees that Imprint is spewing blood and enters the cell to help. Mark uncovers he has an edge and Jack sees it, so he yells an admonition. Charles figures out how to safeguard himself in the nick of time and shuts the cell again prior to leaving. Then Imprint furiously hollers at Jack for demolishing his getaway plan, making the wide range of various individuals in the cells begin shouting too. In a little while, Janetti minds Jack and chooses he's sufficiently quiet to be taken to the. After Charles removes Jack, Janetti approaches Imprint and notices a treatment called Orpheum before tenderly contacting his head to keep him latent. At the psych ward, a medical caretaker named Nancy requests that Jack sit tight briefly while she completes his desk work. When she's in another room, Jack starts checking different patients out. He moves toward a lady believing it's Lily, yet it's really a patient named Heather, who is well disposed and provides him with a piece of paper. Unexpectedly she begins shouting, blaming Jack for needing to exploit her. Nancy quickly returns and makes Heather shut up by taking steps to take her higher up. Subsequently Nancy shows Jack around while making sense of the standards. At that point she's gone after by Loomis, who starts stifling her and makes her drop her emergency signal. This is gotten by Dave, who passes it to Jack so he can press the button. Before long Janetti comes and with only a couple of words, he makes Loomis let go of Nancy. Then, at that point, Charles tushes Loomis to take him higher up while Janetti reports a lockdown. Nancy takes Jack to his room and he professes to nod off. When she's gone, he keeps an eye on the window to check whether getting away from through it is conceivable. Unexpectedly he hears a commotion and opens the wardrobe to find Dave, who makes sense of he just needs to be certain Jack doesn't have insane eyes. Jack acknowledges Imprint had white eyes and Dave affirms it's brought about by the Orpheum treatment. On the roof, Jack can see a light messing up and Dave makes sense of Orpheum occurs in a lab higher up. The people who get treated there returned altogether different. At the lab, Janetti shocks Loomis until his mouth is frothing. The colleague Vera switches off the machine and chastens Janetti for taking it excessively far, yet Janetti says he understands what he's doing and requests that she plan Loomis for an extra portion of Orpheum. At the point when Vera denies, Janetti snaps and starts depicting how Orpheum could help the patient's minds while infusing Loomis himself. This makes his eyes go white. The following day Jack at last sees his sister on the nursery, so he heads to the familiar space to sit tight for her. At the point when he moves toward her, Lily promptly reprimands him for coming, saying she would rather not be saved on the grounds that she's all around as debilitated as their mother. A contention follows and Lily hollers, so a medical caretaker sends her back to her room. This is seen by Heather, who looks captivated. Later in the cafeteria, Jack takes a spoon and places it in his pocket while no one's looking. Unexpectedly Heather approaches him to get some information about Lily. She additionally welcomes Jack to come to her room at night, yet he turns her down and overlooks her hollering. Jack sits with Dave and before long they're joined by Charles, who helps Dave to remember their arrangement. Dave should take some medication for him or Charles will report him. After Charles leaves, Dave requests that Jack stay discreet, and consequently he guarantees he won't let anybody know that Jack isn't really insane, which he sorted out in light of the fact that Jack acts rational in private. That evening, Charles gets in Heather's room and powers her to do the filthy with him. This happens routinely, and Charles keeps her calm by bringing up no one would trust her. In the interim, Jack attempts to utilize the spoon to get parts from the bed. The following morning, he utilizes those parts to take a stab at opening the window, yet he fizzles and damages his finger all the while. Later during bunch treatment, Jack shares a tale about his mom's infection and the way in which they worked on her cerebrum on different occasions. His hand continues to drain, and soon Loomis tumbles to his knees and starts jerking while at the same time gazing at the blood. The medical attendant advises him to get back to his seat. Be that as it may, all things being equal, Loomis hops on Jack while one more persistent with white eyes licks the blood on the floor. Bedlam ejects as the folks battle, and the medical attendant takes out her signal for an emergency response, yet before she can squeeze it, Loomis nibbles her hand to stop her. Charles shows up and touches Loomis to take him out, then the attendant sends everybody to their rooms as she reports another lockdown. Jack and Dave concur that Loomis needed Jack's blood, and that implies Orpheum isn't simply a treatment. Thereafter, Jack demands a gathering with Janetti and requests that he get his letter from his loft. They truly do track down the letter, but the paper is vacant with the exception of several words. Jack goes nuts and blames Janetti for pulling a prank on him while swearing he isn't insane, yet Janetti simply arranges Charles to take Jack to greatest security. Jack shouts and battles the whole way there without any result. Different patients shout at him consequently, and Imprint reminds him he needs retribution. Numerous hours pass and Jack feels like he's going off the deep end. At the point when Janetti comes to keep an eye on him, Jack returns to imagining he's crazy and apologizes for his eruption prior, so he's permitted to return to the mental ward. In the early evening, Jack requests that Dave train him to sneak around as he does to take medication since he needs to explore Orpheum, yet Dave rejects. That evening, Jack escapes his room and is surprised by Dave. He's adjusted his perspective and consents to tell Jack the best way to sneak around, yet he will not go with him higher up. The team cautiously travels through the office while staying away from Charles, and Dave tells Jack the best way to get into an office, where Dave takes medication while Jack checks the work area and takes a security card. At that point Charles comes in, however the pair figures out how to conceal in the nick of time. Charles glances around and rapidly leaves. A while later Jack utilizes the security vehicle to open the entryway and go higher up. Charles is diverted on the telephone and isn't taking a gander at the surveillance cameras, so Jack effectively continues moving around without getting found out. Ultimately he comes to the singular ward and really takes a look at the window on each room, getting surprised by areas of strength from the insane individuals. A couple of entryways later he finds Lily, who apologizes for hollering at him last time and asks for help since she's seen her neighbors under the impact of the examinations. Tragically Jack hears Charles coming, so he needs to take off. In the wake of going through a lot of halls, including the most extreme security, Jack arrives at Janetti's lab. He finds an enclosure and staggers back in shock when he sees Loomis inside attempting to go after him. Jack keeps on glancing around and finds a container of Orpheum, which he takes along with a surgical blade. Then he needs to stow away in light of the fact that he hears voices. Janetti comes in followed by Vera, who brings up Orpheum as duplicating in the patient's body. Janetti snaps and pushes her against the racks, tying her up while making sense of that Orpheum is more than medication. He says it's really nanotechnology and it's acting the manner in which he modified it too. Vera brings up Orpheum as transforming and could become infectious, yet Janetti overlooks her while getting an infusion for himself. Next he makes a cut on her leg with a surgical tool, and her aggravation is invigorating to the point that he begins doing the messy forcibly while Loomis watches. At the point when he's finished, he arranges Vera to track down the change to control it. Then, at that point, Vera gets her fingers wet with her blood and prods Loomis with it. The following day, Heather prods Jack since he appears as though he didn't rest. He overlooks her and approaches Dave to show him the Orpheum bottle. At the point when the medical caretaker comes to eliminate his tag, he figures out how to conceal the jug in his clenched hand in the nick of time. A short time later, Jack brings Dave outside and requests that he take Charles's keys so he can safeguard Lily. They're intruded on by a patient with white eyes, who has tracked down a feline. He shows the creature off before abruptly executing the unfortunate animal to eat it. The couple frenzies and attempts to run, just for the person to snatch Dave. Jack promptly pushes the man to save Dave and gets gone after all things being equal. As the two men wrestle on the ground, different patients take the feline's body to take care of. Fortunately, Charles shows up and touches the person oblivious. That evening, Jack has a horrible brimming with dreadful pictures like insane individuals getting vicious, his mother's demise, Lily's self-erasure endeavor, and peculiar changed bodies. In the first part of the day, Jack races to the well-known room and kicks a table as he requests to see Lily. The medical attendant lets him know that she's higher up with Jeanette, making him irate. Jack shouts at her in notification her white eyes, yet the medical caretaker swears it's typical in light of the fact that it's simply a secondary effect from Luma's bite. She thinks about sending him higher up, however Nancy returns him to his room and locks the entryway. In the meantime, Vera carries food to the patients in the greatest security, pushing it through a unique trapdoor. Mark tosses his plate on the ground, saying he leaned towards it when his food is alive. That evening, somebody goes into Jack's room and he hops on them. However, it's simply Dave who's figured out how to take Charles's keys by placing dosing medication in his beverage. As the pair advances higher up, Lily is restricted in the lab and asks for kindness while Vera attempts to take care of Loomis. He's snoozing so she has a go at jabbing him with a stick, which inadvertently falls. At the point when Vera attempts to take it back, Loomis abruptly gets her arm and breaks it to suck the blood. As Lily shouts for help, Vera pulls back and loses her appendage, so she ties her belt around the subsequent stump to deal with the dying. At that point, Jeanette enters the lab and flies off the handle at Vera for seriously endangering the whole program. Vera gets down on his mentality, yet he simply says that she didn't mind when she wasn't the person in question. He attaches her to a bed in one more space to treat her and takes an example from her arm while affirming the disease is spreading, which fulfills him. Then, at that point, he goes searching for Charles and doesn't track down him. Notwithstanding, he sees Jack and Dave on the surveillance cameras. He has a go at reaching Charles, however he's staying in bed Heather's room and she conceals the radio. Jack and Dave keep on sneaking around and cross the most extreme security passage. Mark offers to collaborate with them, yet Jack rejects. At that equivalent time that the medical caretaker comes to mind Vera, Jeanette snaps out of frustration and short-circuits the power, making the entryways of the most extreme security region open. Every one of the hazardous patients emerge and Jack wards them off while Dave battles with the entryway until he opens it. The pair gets into the other room and uses Charles' taser to short-circuiting the lock, causing a shock that pushes the patients back. Then they begin taking off, just for the risky patients to pursue them. In the long run they arrive at the lab and it takes Jack a few minutes to manage the lock. The patients are going to get them, yet the pair opens the lab without a moment to spare and heads inside, pushing the way to secure it and pulverizing a patient's fingers simultaneously. Then, at that point, Jack races to loosen Lily, who affirms Jeanette hasn't infused her yet. In the meantime, the attendant is dealing with Vera's injury. Yet, at that point, she at long last loses it and starts benefiting from it. Back to Jack's gathering, they leave the lab and presently need to cross greatest security to arrive at the steps. In the cells, there are heaps of blood and bodies from the patients killed by those with white eyes. They open the entryway toward the finish of the hallway just to find it hindered, meaning it's a snare. The tainted patients emerge from the roof, so Jack attempts to enact the lift with the wires from the lock while Lily and Dave battle the patients with the tasers. They begin cutting foes down, and in the event that anybody winds up dying, different patients wind up benefiting from their partners. Unexpectedly, Imprint arrives at Lily and starts hauling her away, yet fortunately Dave assaults Imprint and saves her without a moment to spare. At the point when Jack is at long last finished with the lift, he joins the battle and nearly winds up dead by an adversary, just for Lily to overcome the person by tasing him in the mouth. The triplet races to get in the lift and Imprint pursues them, holding the entryway open. Anyway, Jack wounds him in the jawline with the surgical blade, permitting the lift to close. In no time flat, the gathering comes to the mental ward and Jack breaks the lift's cushion so they can't be followed. They're stunned to find blood all over the place. So Jack requests that Dave safeguard Lily while he researches. He follows a strange commotion and opens a room entryway to find Heather eating a dead Charles. She quickly sees him and starts following him. Consequently, Jack steps away and pushes different patients off prior to punching Heather and taking off. As additional patients follow him, Jack gets back to Lily and Dave and they block the entryway prior to leaving. In the gathering, Nancy sees them and tosses a seat through the glass in alarm. However, she quiets down when she understands the triplet isn't tainted. Anxious to escape as well, she directs the gathering to the kitchen to track down a substitute exit and get a few blades for self-protection. Out of nowhere, a patient leaps on Jack. However, the person gets handily overwhelmed and they kill him with a blade to his face. Before long, more patients show up and a horrendous battle results as blood is splattered all around the kitchen because of all the wounding. A lot of patients wind up dead as the legends clear their path through the kitchen. Lastly, arrive at a secondary passage, which they make a point to lock prior to going up the crisis steps. At last they track down an office and attempt to search for a telephone, just to track down the tainted medical caretaker, all things being equal. She makes sense of Jeanette is searching for an answer. So everybody ought to stand by. The medical caretaker additionally hollers at Nancy for leaving her station, yet Nancy quiets her down by cutting her. Next, Nancy recalls Jeanette has a firearm, so the gathering races to his office. Dave takes a blade from the wall and Jack opens the work area cabinet to track down the firearm along with his genuine letter. On out, they notice a blood track on the floor and follow it. At that point, the medical caretaker blasts through an entryway and assaults Nancy, just to get cut to death by Lily. Then, at that point, they go through the recuperation ward and find Vera, who educates them regarding a secret section in the lab and how to utilize the clothing chute to stay away from the steps. Before they leave, Vera requests euthanization so she doesn't turn into a barbarian as well. Nancy gives her an infusion and Vera kicks the bucket. The gathering begins running again to stay away from additional approaching patients while searching for the clothing chute. Nancy opens an entryway and finds a contaminated housekeeper, who bounces on her and chomps her neck. Jack hurries to kill the lady and minds Nancy, who tragically is now dead. In the interim, Dave and Lily find the clothing chute, so they begin moving through it while Jack continues terminating at approaching patients. Heather additionally comes and Jack takes a stab at shooting her, just to find he's out of slugs. Rather, he starts her off prior to getting in the chute too, making Heather follow him. After some battle against her hands, Jack figures out how to cut her and make her fall. The threesome proceeds to climb and turns out in most extreme security, where the tainted patients have eaten one another. Out of nowhere, Imprint obstructs their direction and assaults Jack with the surgical tool from previously. The men scarcely get to battle before Lily starts separate and wounds him first, killing him for good. Then, at that point, the triplet at long last arrives at the lab, finding Loomis is still in his enclosure. While Jack and Lily reveal the mystery burrow, the men are still in the lab. Jeanette shows up and gets Dave, gradually putting an ice pick in his eye to play out an ad-libbed lobotomy. It doesn't kill him yet, it obliterates his mind. Next, Jeanette hits Jack with a light and takes a stab at going after him with the ice pick, so the kin battle together to overwhelm the specialist. Jack takes the ice pick when his leg gets wounded and pushes Jeanette, cutting him back before Lily touches him oblivious. At the point when Jeanette awakens, he's been attached to the enclosure so Loomis can benefit from him. The kin take off through the mystery burrow while hearing Jeanette's shouts. The passage takes them to the rooftop. What's more, as the kin go down the steps, Jack coincidentally drops the Orpheum bottle, what breaks. Toward the beginning of the day, they're at last out and meandering through the street until they're tracked down by the police. Subsequent to hearing their story, the police drive to the refuge and Jeanette opens the entryway looking fine and dandy. Out of nowhere, a lot of tainted patients burst out and kill the police on top of the vehicle while the kin vulnerably watch. In the end, the patients take off into the wild to spread the contamination, disregarding Jeanette's shouts saying he can help them. Try to buy in and turn on warnings so you can observe more recordings like this. Gratitude for watching.